You've probably heard of Nouns, the pixel art NFTs with heads like a fox, lipstick, or a shark. So TLDR is that they've built up a huge treasury of over 28,000 ETH from daily auctions of one noun a day, and holders can vote on-chain on how to spend that ETH.
The latest contentious proposal asking for 25 ETH has 179 votes for and 173 votes against. Can you guess what it's about?
That's right, a children's book.
So before we get into this episode with our Nounish guest, Chris Carella, a number of things have been changing around Juicebox.money. So be sure to check out our new homepage, new about page, success stories section, and new features like project tags. We've got a walkthrough on YouTube and the blog, which we'll link to in the show notes.
All right, so today we'll be talking with Chris Carella. Chris is a Nouns delegate, head of product at Charmverse, and co-founder of Purple, a DAO dedicated to funding public goods in the Farcaster ecosystem.
In this episode, we talk about what it means to be a Nounish DAO, the Arbitrum airdrop, and the tensions between financial incentives and the boring reality of governance, as well as the importance of funding public goods in Ethereum.
Just a small note that this recording took place right before ETH Tokyo and NFT NYC, so the context of certain discussions may have shifted since then.
We hope you enjoy this week's episode. All right, welcome to the Juicecast, Chris. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great today, and thanks for having me. Juicebox is actually maybe the very beginning of my DAO journey in a way that I'm sure we can discuss.
Really? Okay, yeah, we'll definitely have to get to that. It's funny because we've been getting ready to go to ETH Global. It might be our first time doing like a hackathon, but we're not sure yet. But we actually have a background in like photography. We're also like transitioning photographer to dev, but also like transitioning shooting film to digital. But we don't actually have a camera to work with other than like my Hasselblad. So we've been like looking at like camera stores and like marketplaces, trying to like find something. And then we keep seeing all these like used cameras in Japan. And we're like, well, why don't we just buy the camera in Japan? And it turns out it's like way cheaper. So we figured that we're just going to like go all in.
That's amazing. You should document that process.
Yeah, well, basically, we have to just walk into a store a little bit outside of the city center of Osaka and hand them like several $1,000s. And I don't think there's really going to be a lot of English communication happening. So it's going to be a very interesting experience for us. But all that to say that we're likely our first hackathon. So we were curious to hear more about your background because stepping back a little bit, your background is in computer science, if I'm not mistaken. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit of the Chris Carella origin story and what you were up to before you got into crypto and DAO stuff. And then we can get into that later.
Sure. So I graduated college with a computer science degree, and then I joined the research institute at Dartmouth College as a programmer. It was the Institute for Security Technology Studies, and it was all about computer security, which really was my first love. And just working in that research institute for even maybe half a year, I realized that I wasn't the best programmer. I didn't love programming the way other people loved programming. And I just started to wonder, what the future held for me. Now, at the same time, I'm talking about 2002 maybe, so this is a very long time ago.
Okay.
UX was like maybe an emerging field, but not really well understood. Product management didn't exist at all. But the principals at the Research Institute, which were professors and people who held their PhDs, what they really loved is that I could sort of take the requirements from the principals and then talk to the engineering team and the design team and basically make the product, right? So it's like today what we would call product management. For them, I was just kind of this oddball who wasn't quite a great engineer. I wasn't a designer, but I was really valuable to the Institute, just being that connective tissue. And so from there, I left the Institute. This is not going to be like a super long story, but I'll hit the highlights.
No, go for it.
I left the Institute and joined my first startup called the Electric Sheep Company, where I joined as first the creative director and then eventually the chief creative officer. And the Electric Sheep Company was building software on top of Second Life. Second Life was kind of the last iteration of virtual worlds. Second Life and the metaverse was Second Life. We were an agency, ultimately. We thought of ourselves as a software company, but we built a lot of the cool experiences and projects that wound up really just hyping Second Life for a minute there. And, our projects were on television and on the cover of Newsweek and all of that. And I wound up getting heavily into game design. I think my interest in Second Life and virtual worlds was just sort of my interest in being a futurist and where technology can go. I got really heavily involved in game design. I left the Electric Sheep Company when the iPhone came out, and I immediately wanted to build mobile apps. And so I started, my very first thing was, I was this game designer guy, and mobile apps were brand new, and gamification was kind of a hot topic. And so I wound up coming into these early app companies. Before the slogan, there's an app for that. I'm helping them gamify things.
Right.
And then that just sort of rolled forward into being a co-founder multiple times, always kind of the product co-founder or being head of product basically everywhere I have gone. And my real interest is just generally consumer internet technology. I've done 2 stints in data science. And so I also love data science. Have sold a couple of these companies along the way, either as an employee or as a co-founder.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And then right before I sort of went all in on crypto, I was working at a startup studio, and I worked there for about 5 years, and we were cranking out 1 or 2 new products a year. And I found that really stimulating and fun. And then crypto.
Wow. Okay. Thank you for this succinct but great summary of everything that led up until falling down the crypto rabbit hole. What happened next? How did you then transition from that into Web3?
I have been interested in sort of blockchains and cryptocurrency for quite some time. I mined Bitcoin when you could do that on your laptop. I tuned back into Ethereum around CryptoKitties. And I was day one very interested, but I could never quite figure out someone with my skill set where it's I'm a maker, I'm a product manager, I'm an artist. I could never quite figure out how I could break into blockchain at the time, because even in the times of CryptoKitties, I remember looking for jobs. And the only things that people were hiring were math PhDs. And at that time, it's I had built this great network in the startup world, and then, really strong in the New York City startup world. But this sort of Ethereum world was just not connected to that network. And I literally didn't know anyone working in cryptocurrency. And so that actually led me to the startup studio, which, okay, cool. I know how to build apps, and, I have a great network there. So let's build this startup studio. And then, I think 2020 happened, and
yeah,
the world changed, and it allowed me to reassess what I want to be doing and what I'm interested in.
Right.
And then I discovered NFTs. I was thinking about my art practice, and I was looking for a way to authenticate my physical paintings. And then I went down the NFT rabbit hole for that, which I ultimately decided was not a very good use case. But in that process, I found NBA Top Shot, and the NBA Top Shot product experience is as good as anything in Web 2. Really high quality, easy to use, entertainment experience. And so then it hit me. I was oh, this space is ready for people like me now. If they can build this, I can go build some cool stuff. So left the startup studio and just was kind of exploring the NFT space, the Web3 space in general. But really specifically, I was very excited about NFTs, and I was tweeting a lot about it. And then a friend of mine who worked at Tezos reached out to me and said hey, we are trying to build an NFT platform on Tezos. Why don't you come and do this with us? And so that was the end of 2020 and the beginning of 2021.
Okay.
I built an NFT platform called Truzy. And Truzy was a Tezos-based NFT platform that was really highly curated. And the curation were people in fashion, hype beasts. We have a guy named Greg Yuma who's Drake's jeweler. So it was really kind of this street art, fashion, graffiti, sneakerhead culture, which is something I was a part of. And so I was a really good fit for that. And that was kind of how I got introduced to building in Web3, and actually very interesting. It's Tezos, I don't know what the current state of Tezos is, but when I joined, there were very few tools. In fact, one of the first things I did there was help them build the first piece of software that could mint NFTs.
Oh, wow.
And so as we built this platform, we just kind of built everything from scratch, which really got me into sort of the low-level details of how blockchains work. And so when I eventually transitioned over to Ethereum, it was this breath of fresh air where all of the tools exist. And, there are great SDKs and toolkits and stuff.
So, from sleuthing your wallet, we know that you're a member of SharkDAO, which was actually my first DAO, thanks to Nicholas. I don't know if you know Nicholas from Twitter and Juicebox, but I remember joining and I was still like really green and didn't really fully get it. And also, I barely kind of understood what Nouns was, never mind like sub DAOs or any of the other kind of complexities to that. But I was kind of like hanging around and figuring things out. And then later on, basically within 6 months, Brileigh and I were working at it, another couple DAOs, including Juicebox, not too long after. And earlier you mentioned that Juicebox was part of the beginning of your journey here. So I'm curious to know how you stumbled upon Juicebox. Was it related to SharkDAO or how did that happen?
Yeah, absolutely. So it was, I'll just tell this quick part of the story, which was I left Tezos and I guess this was like summer of 2021.
Okay.
And the MFT mania was like really at its peak. And I had just built an MFT platform. We were one of the early ones. And I just had like the day I left Tezos, I just had all of these crazy job offers to go build NFT platforms for like tons of different people. And I was like very turned off by the whole process because I just had met a lot of entrepreneurs and people who had just closed rounds who like I just did not feel were in it for the right reasons or they didn't quite have the right vision. It was a lot of like the get rich quick mentality of that NFT mania, but these were like legitimate entrepreneurs that had histories, but I just could feel this like get rich quick feeling coming through it all, and not like this future of the internet feeling, which is what I have, And so I went back into data science, but then my nights and weekends were like deep research into the world of Ethereum. And so having come from Tezos, I was like really deeply in that ecosystem. And so I wound up like spending a few months just really understanding what NFTs were in Ethereum, what the culture is, who are the artists to pay attention to. And through that, I found Nouns. And then through that, found SharkDAO. And I think I joined SharkDAO in September of that year. So pretty early, not for Noun number one, but pretty early. And then to join SharkDAO, you had to use Juicebox.
Right.
And the whole notion of kind of like crowdfunding, it was all very foreign and different to me, And so like just even really understanding what was happening with Juicebox was just a kind of another entry into the world of Web3 and Ethereum. And then that just opened up the whole world of Nouns for me. Once I joined SharkDAO, I'm sure you have a very similar experience. It was very exciting. The Discord was too much to keep on top of. It was like crazy, And so I followed along and I was excited. And then I kind of fell off a little bit because it was just like very hard to stay on top of, all of the messages that were streaming through that Discord. And then I just tuned back in like maybe January. So it was only like a few months. Of course, in crypto, that feels like a few years. So it was like a few months. I checked out the SharkDAO Discord. It was like much more sane. And then I just started getting involved as a contributor there.
Yeah, I mean, my background for a few years before I joined SharkDAO was working at a university. I teach at a university. And just being thrown into the DAO environment, it's such a wild jungle of... There's just so much activity, at least in a really active DAO. And it can be really disorienting to first join, and especially if you want to contribute. The path to becoming a DAO contributor is still really challenging for a new person. I think now Brileigh and I have been doing this for a year or so. So of course, like now we could figure it out a lot more easily. But I remember like at first that experience was really overwhelming. I'm curious, what was it about the novelty of like the organizational structure of a DAO, or like what was it that appealed to you to learn more about DAOs and get involved directly?
Yeah, so I think SharkDAO was actually a pretty hard first DAO to join. I love SharkDAO, and I'm friends with people from those times still. But DAOs really can run the gamut from being mostly centralized to like highly decentralized. And SharkDAO was like on the far end of permissionless and decentralized. And so not only was it like hard to figure out how to participate, it was like beyond hard to figure out how to participate because there was no one making decisions, and there's like some middle ground where there is like a leadership team and you kind of can get them on board and join initiatives. In SharkDAO, it was just totally like, cool, pitch an idea, get the community of thousands of people excited, and you can do your thing. So that definitely was like a really tough intro to DAOs, but it sort of hit me right away that like, oh, we have a new internet native way to organize people. And I just really latched on in the first 30 seconds of that concept of, we have nonprofits, we have corporations, we have governance, but now we have kind of a new internet native way to do this. And I knew it was early then. I still believe it's very early now. But yeah, I'm just like I think there's something really magical happening here and really important for how we're going to share resources in the future and, human organizations.
Yeah, totally. I'm wondering, like, from SharkDAO, if you could tell us, like, your journey in, like, the Nouns ecosystem and, like, how has your perception of Nouns changed from, like, when you first saw it, and maybe, like, what is it like to be now, like, as you're representing two Nouns as a delegate?
Yeah, I think about this a lot, actually. Just as a side tangent, it's like, what is the best thing about being in Web3? It's like you learn every day something new.
Totally.
And it's like I had been towards like the tail end of my Web2 career, like just not learning anything. I knew the playbook. I could try to optimize some small things, like, can I get you to click this button? But I wasn't like fundamentally learning new things, So fast forward to Nouns. I was pretty like into SharkDAO as the DAO, and Nouns was kind of the thing we voted on. And it felt like a fun social club, SharkDAO, and that we were voting on Nouns things. When we have our own initiatives, we would get excited about it and try to do that. But there wasn't a lot of deep introspection about Nouns itself, at least my experience. But nonetheless, I learned like what it means to be Nounish in those times, those early times, right? Like those first year, about like this CCO Disney vision, about public goods, about, just like the good vibes that is Nouns, the fun playfulness. And so that was like really ingrained in me. I then from there went to Little Nouns, one of the first forks of Nouns. And I was involved in Little Nouns for a little bit. The price was so much cheaper, so I was able to amass a number of Little Nouns. When I had joined, the community was like a little bit in between what it wanted to be when it was going to grow up. And some people in the community just wanted to collect more Nouns. Some people in the community wanted to fund projects like Nouns does. I was more on the like, let's fund cool stuff side of the group. But nonetheless, it was like clearly leaning towards the like, let's just collect more Nouns. This is a snapshot in time. I think things have changed again. And so I just kind of was disengaging with Little Nouns, but I do feel like I learned more about Nouns through Little Nouns. They took Nouns more serious and the Nounish culture, and they talked a lot about it. And so there was a lot of learning about Nouns through Little Nouns. So it's funny, like at any one of these points, you think you know everything there is to know about all of this stuff, which of course you don't. So then my next journey is I discovered Farcaster. And so, Farcaster is not Nouns, but Farcaster is a decentralized social networking protocol. There's a first-party app on it called Warpcast, which looks a lot like Twitter.
Yeah.
It's a great app. It's very efficient. It has none of the things you might think of when you think of blockchain apps. And I just got really involved. And, it's probably a lot to go deep on this story, but I was like just very inspired by the things that were being built on the Farcaster protocol permissionlessly, for no reward. People were just building cool stuff. And it gave me this like 2007, 2008 Twitter vibes when they had a really robust API and people were just building cool stuff on Twitter.
Right.
And so I like immediately was struck by that and thought like, oh my God, like I've seen this before. This is so cool, So from there, I just sent a cast, which is like sending a tweet. It's kind of like you send a tweet with your ideas and 99.99% of them never happen. But I'd sent that cast of like, hey, it would be really cool to build a Nounish DAO to support the builders in the Farcaster ecosystem. And then furthermore, I thought like, but I'm not going to do this because I'm not going to fork the Nouns contracts and figure out how all this works. And like, it's just a skill set a little bit beyond me. And immediately the two co-founders of Purple hit me in Telegram, like immediately, Osama and Matt. And they said like, hey, this is really cool. Let's do it. And they were highly technical and they were like, we can fork this contract. We can do it. And then we shared that Telegram on Farcaster and slowly like the community started to build just around this idea. And then Jacob from Zora entered the chat and mentioned like, hey, we're building Nouns build and you should totally do this on nouns.build. And we're in testnet, so you should do it all now and play with it. And so we did that. We have a community, I don't know, maybe it was like 60 people who were all excited about this in our Telegram, and we have a shared Google Doc. And, we would launch these kind of testnet versions of what the DAO could be. The first one, the artwork was like very Nounish. And then, the second one, it was like all of the Nouns artwork, but they always had a Purple Farcaster shirt on. And then we eventually decided on the Purple Square. But then the day came when nouns.build went to mainnet, and I launched those contracts, and we were live. And this is where like my next very deep level of learning of what Nouns is all about happens, because I've been so surrounded by Nounish people and people who like understand Nouns, and
right.
And I may be mistaking that for like crypto people understand Nouns, but I, as soon as we launched Purple, realized that Farcaster, which is a network of Ethereum lovers and highly sophisticated crypto people, like a lot of people had the wrong idea on what Nouns was or how it worked. And they were calling us oligarchs, and Nouns is an oligarchy. And Chris is gonna rug us was another good one that I liked,
Oh, no.
And which, of course, I'm a Nounish DAO. It's very hard to rug because all the money goes to a shared treasury and you have to vote.
Yeah, exactly.
And so I found myself being like this Nouns advocate by accident because I really wanted to focus on the Farcaster community. But people were asking me the hard questions no one had ever asked me before. So I'd have to like go away and deep think and say, oh, this is why it works this way. And, did a bunch of media around Farcaster to try to just let the community know that like we weren't there to ruin things, which was like a very vocal minority of people were like very concerned that we had this like beautiful community and now you just added a money element to the community and that's going to ruin everything. So through that, it's like I learned a lot more about the mechanics of operating these things, like what it really takes and how it all really works, what the smart contracts actually do. And so I went down that kind of rabbit hole through Purple, and then I sort of emerged from that thinking like, I know everything about Nouns. And then I get delegated to Nouns. And then it's like the next wave of learning happens where it's like, oh, now I actually have Nouns. And now I get to vote firsthand and I get to talk to the builders firsthand. And so now I'm like on another sort of learning journey about like, well, what does it actually mean to be Nounish? And how should I vote on these things? And how do these votes affect the overall organization? And so that was a very long story and saying like, this has just been an entirely multi-year learning curve going from like kind of an observer in SharkDAO to launching my own Nounish DAO to being delegated to Nouns and like just going deep into the Nouns community.
Totally. So you gave a talk at ETH Denver this year about Nounish DAOs, right?
That's right.
So I'm wondering, like, I know we've kind of alluded to this in what you just mentioned, but can you tell us exactly what that means? Like, do you mean a DAO that utilizes the Nouns auction model to fund a treasury? Or like, what exactly makes a DAO Nounish?
Sure. So I think the short answer is that you launch this DAO on nouns.build, which is a tool that allows you to create Nounish DAOs. What my talk was about and sort of, what I believe is that there are these 5 smart contracts that you use as like the cornerstone of your organization. It's the NFT contract, it's the auction house contract, it's the governor, the treasury, and the metadata. And so those 5 smart contracts make up what is a Nounish DAO. And this is like, if you think about it from a way to operate your organization, there's many different ways to operate a DAO or your organization, but a Nounish way to do it is to use these contracts. And then like, just to describe them, the NFT contract is the NFTs. The Nouns NFTs have multiple layers and they're generative and they're based on like the block the NFT was generated. There's the auction house, the contract that does the auction, is how people join the DAO and purchase a token.
Right.
There's the governor, which is where all governance happens. And so Nouns is a fully on-chain DAO. And so proposals are on-chain, votes are on-chain. All of that is controlled by the governor. The money is in the treasury. The treasury can only be accessed through the governor. Right. So the treasury contract is where all the money lives. And then the metadata is the name of your DAO, the description. There's just kind of a lot like what it says, the metadata in there. Mm-hmm. And so when you have these 5 and they're working together, you wind up in sort of a Nounish structure where you have an auction at some cadence. A lot of people choose daily, but it can be whatever cadence you want. It creates an NFT that's unique. A lot of times the artwork is unique. And then all of the money from the auction sales go into a treasury. And that treasury can only be unlocked by proposals that come from the governor. And so that's one kind of very technical way to describe what is like a Nounish DAO. It's like, well, it's these 5 smart contracts and the way you operate your organization using these 5 smart contracts. And you try to keep everything you can on chain and just like kind of Ethereum pure in that way. I will say that I believe there is like a culture component on top of it. And so I didn't talk that much about it in ETH Denver, except it was like every slide had fun images and the whole thing was about culture in a sense. Right. So you have the 5 smart contracts that like operate in a Nounish way. And then there's just sort of a culture that happens on top of it that I think truly makes you a Nounish DAO. And that culture comes from Nouns, the mothership, and is spread through all of these other DAOs. And it's very hard to pinpoint like what that culture is or what it means to be the culture of Nounish, but it is like a lot about generosity. It's a lot about like giving your time and resources and in some cases your money without any expectations of returns. There's a playfulness to it all. So you don't really want to be too serious. It's like fun and playful. And then there's kind of a public goods component to it that's just generally highly encouraged. And so I think that if you have the Nounish organization using your smart contracts, and then you just have kind of like the Nounish culture and vibes, and you put those 2 together, you're like very welcomed by the Nouns community. And that was actually a pretty big surprise to me, was that we launched Purple, and it was really very focused on Farcaster. And Nouners saw what we were doing and like just really welcomed us. And I would join these Twitter spaces in the crowd and hear people talking about Purple and excited about Purple. And, you know, I would get reached out to by some of the Nouners that, like, you know, coming from SharkDAO and going through this whole experience were like the early Nouners that I was like really inspired by would reach out to me and just tell me like, oh, it's really cool what you're doing, and then have some deep discussion around it.
Yeah, that's really sweet that you like launched this Nounish DAO and then like the original community is in support of it. And this great analogy for like Nouns and other Nounish DAOs is that it's with regards to the culture, it's like you're building the plane while it's in the air. And so anyone that's like coming into that is like understanding that we're figuring things out as we go along, and we're just excited to like get our hands dirty and like help proliferate. And I'm wondering like why you feel that it was important for Purple to be a Nounish DAO, or like why that decision was made, given that there are so many different structures in like the broader DAO landscape of like how DAOs can sort of operate.
I probably didn't think as hard about it as you might think. It was sort of the structure I knew. You know, I will say that I'm in many DAOs. You know, after SharkDAO, the sort of next DAO that caught my attention was Friends with Benefits. And so I joined FWB. It was right around like Art Basel 2 years ago. And basically a month after I joined Friends with Benefits, I got to meet dozens of them in real life at these really great art parties and stuff. And then it was really cool. And so, you know, my frame of reference, maybe even going into Purple, was, okay, here's SharkDAO, which is totally permissionless and decentralized. And then here is Friends with Benefits, which is not that permissionless and decentralized. They have a paid leadership team. There's not a lot of diversity of thought when it comes to proposals and how people vote, but they like produce amazing stuff. You know, they're like highly efficient. And so those are kind of the two bounds that I have always still think about. DAOs can kind of run the gamut. And I knew I wanted Purple to be a community-controlled thing. I never thought of myself. These are like, I'm lucky that I find myself in the position now that when people want to launch Nounish DAOs, they often reach out to me. And I have a bunch of experience that I can tell them. And I have a lot of naivety going into it. And so I never thought of myself as the co-founder of this thing, or that DAOs even had co-founders, you know. And even to this day, it's like we have 120 members in Purple. I am one of them. I have no special powers, you know. But I just thought it worked that way. Like, oh, cool, I'm going to launch a DAO. It's going to be a community thing. We're going to do it in a Nounish DAO, which I just think operates well, the best, I would say, for decentralized DAOs, and making sure everyone in the community can have ownership of, not just the ownership of the token, but like the ownership of, you know, we'll say the meme or the idea. Like, we are all Purple, right? And so Nouns is like a good fit that way, because I didn't want it to be like, oh, there's this leadership team or there's this founding team. To me, it was just like, we are all Farcasters. We want to do a DAO together. We have this cool Nounish mechanism to raise the treasury and a fully kind of decentralized way to run it, and totally on chain. And so all of that kind of just led into like, I just wanted to do it that way. I had seen a bunch of other ways that it worked. I thought this was a good way. I also like just thought Farcaster is going to be around forever in the same way that like Ethereum will be around forever. Like, you know, the protocol makes it so that it can be around forever.
Right.
And then I just wanted to think about like, well, what kind of DAO can be around forever? And I still think Nouns is maybe the best example of a DAO that can have like real longevity. Like Nouns exists long after all of us, I think.
Interesting. I guess I hadn't thought of Farcaster in that same way, but yeah, I guess it does have the potential for longevity because it is this more like decentralized network. Yeah, I mean, the thing about Farcaster, like, I really like that Farcaster still feels like a small community. Like, I don't know, there's something still kind of special about the community. I do wonder what happens to that as the number of users grows. And I do also wonder, like, because it feels so close to the product of Twitter. And I do wonder, like, if people will grasp the potential for what it offers beyond that. Because, I mean, we know that it does, but I wonder if, like, at first glance, you know, you would use it and feel like, oh, yeah, this is just like Twitter, and kind of leave it at that and not go further to kind of understand, like, no, you can actually do all these different things with Farcaster that you can't do with something like Twitter. So I'm curious to know, like, why you're bullish on Farcaster. What is it about Farcaster that gets you excited?
Yeah, so I do think just the first part of your comments, like social networks definitely have that, where it starts off small and it's intimate and you feel like you can like speak your mind, and you don't even necessarily feel like you're talking in public, even though you are. And so you're maybe willing to share thoughts that are a little bit more unhinged. And in fact, in the very early days of Farcaster, we had like some of the more famous internet personalities / crypto personalities were posting a lot. And then as the network grew, they started to get quiet, which is a totally early sign of sort of what you're describing, which is like as this thing gets big, it gets less intimate, and then maybe you're more guarded with your thoughts, or you change the way you behave. And I mean, there's nothing about Farcaster that will prevent that, except that anyone can create a client. And so maybe it's like, oh, I really loved when people talked about the NBA. Well, I do believe in the future there will be like an NBA-focused Farcaster client. And where I think it like has tremendous potential is like that it is really truly just like an underlying social protocol. And the current first-party app, Warpcast, which I really like, definitely has kind of those Twitter vibes to it. But a lot of the other stuff people are doing in the community, the developers working on top of Farcaster are building stuff that is like not that. There is something that looks a little bit more like Vine. Someone built a video watching app where it's just like every time someone shares YouTube clips on your Farcaster feed, you have a separate app where you can like go browse these videos. There's a really great governance client called AlphaCaster, and it actually pulls in kind of all of the governance information that comes from builder DAOs, and so Purple's on there. And so every time there's a vote, it happens in AlphaCaster. But then every time someone talks about that vote on Farcaster, it's aggregated by that client. And so it winds up being like this really nice glimpse into the future of like, oh yeah, cool, we can all use these town halls to talk about important issues and then have them aggregated in a governance client. And so all of that is just like, I think because it is a protocol that is really well designed and already has a lot of developer energy around it, I think that we're going to see lots of different apps built on top of Farcaster. And there is nothing about the protocol that makes it look like and feel like Twitter. That's just the use case they went for. But I think that will be the thing when you realize you're logging in with your same Farcaster ID, but you're having like a dramatically different experience across 3 or 4 different apps or however you use it. And so where the potential lies is that, you know, you can use your favorite email client to access email. There's lots of different ways people treat email. I think that will be the same in social. I also just think like it's to some extent like almost the ultimate public good where we've allowed sort of our town squares and our public places of meeting to be owned by a couple of corporations. And, you know, I'm a capitalist and I love corporations, but they don't always have the same incentives that we have.
Right.
And so we've basically outsourced our whole public dialogue to corporate America. And so I think it's actually just very important that decentralized social happens. And there's a couple of projects all working on it. And, you know, it's like kind of having a little moment. And just Farcaster is the one I just think I have the most confidence in the team. The reference app they've had now for over a year is the best one I've used. The community is really great and open to having deep discussions, not hot takes. Less dunking, more sort of, just intellectualism happens on Farcaster. It's all still very private. It's on testnet. You need an invite to get into Farcaster, but it's making its progress towards full decentralization. And then later this year, it will go on mainnet. And I think a lot of people will try it for the first time when it's public to the world and it has a lot of the strong fundamentals. And there'll be 5 different clients and 10 different apps and all kinds of stuff already built on top of Farcaster by the time most people even see it.
Is there going to be a token, Chris? Like, am I going to get an airdrop for being an early Farcaster user? Like, please tell me.
So I'm not on that team. Merkle Manufacturer is the company building the Farcaster protocol, which is open and has repos and has open source developers contributing to it. But they have sort of said, no, there's no token, with the sort of caveat of like, maybe one day there would be a token. But I think when they say that caveat, you should not join Farcaster to try to airdrop farm here, because that will be a disappointing experience for you. Yeah. I think it's like they're just very thoughtful. So they look out into the future and they say, well, we shouldn't be in control of the protocol. This is like a community-controlled protocol. So what does governance look like for that protocol? And they frankly don't have the answer. They probably see this as like, look at all these experiments happening. We're not ready to experiment just yet, but fast forward 5 years or 10 years, and for the Farcaster protocol to really be like SMTP, it's going to have a broader governance structure. It's unclear what that is, but currently the tools we have in crypto are tokens. So I would say that's not out of the question. I also have no direct, this is like, I listen to Dan, the founder of Farcaster, on podcasts, and I'm sort of regurgitating what he says on podcasts. I have no inside knowledge on whether there is a token or not.
Yeah, I mean, I'm 99% joking, just because there was the recent Arbitrum airdrop. And just this week, there were like 3 EVM compatible ZK rollups that dropped, 2 or 3, like, which is absolutely wild, because there have been all like none until like very, very recently. And so now we're all like, yeah, gotta go use all the new rollups.
Yeah, I love a good airdrop. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, I won't say no to the Farcaster airdrop, but
what I do think is just challenging with airdrops in general, and like forget airdrops. You're given these governance tokens, and I always just make that decision like, is this something I want to govern? And yes, like, Arbitrum did a good job, like immediately, like find your delegate, or ENS, like find your delegate, But even that is governance. It's like, well, am I just going to give it to this person and then stop paying attention?
Totally.
Or I'm going to give this to this person and pay attention. And so therefore I kind of am in governance by association, It's paradigm shifting that because you used the product, you were given ownership or governance or however they want to say that. But at the same time, it's like, thanks, but no thanks. Like, this is too much responsibility for me. So I'm just going to turn this into ETH and I know what to do with that.
That's sweet, sweet responsibility. I love that responsibility. I don't know. I just remember with ENS, it just became such a meme because some people had made so much money, in some cases, tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars on that airdrop. And then, of course, everyone was there reminding you, you're not just getting money. You need to, there needs to be governance. And it's tough because everyone's going to talk about the airdrop because, of course, they are tradable on exchanges and you can do whatever you want with what's in your wallet. But it's also like, how do you get the community, like, yes, you can give them ownership, but how do you encourage them to actually be interested in governance? Does anyone want to govern Arbitrum? Like, yeah, I mean, there's a small group of people that probably do. We delegated to Frisson from Tally because we know that his values align with ours and, we have confidence in him. But it's like, does the average airdrop recipient want to govern Arbitrum? Like, no way. There's just no chance. And also, I can't blame them either. I don't think it's like a selfish, like a money thing. It's just straight up, do you have time to follow the governance? And even just for us to keep up with the governance of Juicebox is like every 2 weeks we have to go through a new cycle. And, it's a lot of work. So I see it as like a difficult long-term problem to solve because I love the ownership model that comes with this. And I love the idea of you use a protocol, you learn about it. This is all great that we reward users, but it's like, how do you actually incentivize people to govern? It's not so easy.
It's tough, and we don't have great tools necessarily to do these things, and every DAO is using different tools, and so I know the Juicebox process a little bit, and I think you guys have a very well-established process. Yeah, I think you guys have one of the better processes because it's like there's a regular cadence and you know what to expect and you know what the next stage is. When you're in stage A, you know what stage B is. It's great if you're part of Juicebox. If someone just gave you the tokens and said, go govern, it'd be very hard to go find out where that happens, right? Although, I know, Juicebox does a pretty good job and has great web resources. But, I was looking at Gnosis today. I have these safe tokens, they're governance tokens. And I just thought to myself, okay, if I want to help govern this thing, where do I go to even start that process or educate myself? Where are the proposals? That was my thought. I was like, I wonder what kind of things are being proposed. How do I even find that? And so, the industry is still very young. DAOs are even younger. But yeah, we don't really have standard governance practices or just a lot of great tools for that. And so I do think one of the interesting things about being in the Nounish ecosystem, and this is maybe one of the things I just glossed over about being a Nounish DAO. Well, because you're using these 5 smart contracts, there are so many tools available to you that were built for nouns, or they were built for little nouns, or they were built for NARs, or they were built for Builder DAO. And you get to just plug into them, And not only that, those teams will reach out to you and say hey, do you want to do a prop house? And you're like, yeah, I do want to do a prop house. And then I'm now in maybe 5 Nounish DAOs, including Nouns itself. And I actually think it's impossible to be in 5 DAOs at the same time and have any sort of real impact. And so I sometimes think about how can I be in all of these DAOs and have a voice in governance? And I thought because the tools are all the same. So it's I know what to expect. I'm literally in the same tools, just sometimes just drop down and switch from Nouns to Purple. And everything's the same. And so the governance is very unified inside that Nouns system. So it makes it easier to participate in multiple organizations. Or even you can choose to be a lightweight participant in some organizations, but at least you know where all the documentation is and how the votes happen and what kind of small grants are available. It's just kind of an interesting thing about governance as a whole. And then just back to those airdrops, you can only really be effective in so many DAOs. So if every Appu in the world you've used made you a governor, it's just literally impossible to govern. And some of these are big infrastructure. ENS is a big thing, Arbitrum is a big piece of infrastructure.
Totally. Switching over a bit to public goods and funding for public goods, we did some snooping and we saw that you were previously a venture partner at 54 Ventures. Which I find interesting because you're now working on the opposite end of the spectrum with Purple, which uses the Nouns auction mechanism to bootstrap a treasury to fund public goods, which don't necessarily have a profit model like whatsoever. So I'm curious to know like why you sort of moved away from that world of venture capital and why public goods are now such a big part of your life, both in like Purple and like other Nounish communities.
This is like a really good question. That I think a lot about public goods and I think about venture, but I never tied the two together. The venture capital model is great for what it is designed to do, which is to like grow and scale companies, or maybe if you even go back to like an older school definition of just providing the startup capital for an entrepreneur to chase a dream. That's great. It works. It's effective. I'm a fan of it. It's not for everyone, but it is really effective when it's applied correctly. It's not at all useful for public goods. And in fact, like public goods lacked a real funding mechanism for like most of history. And I think that changes with blockchain and with Ethereum and having tokens. And so my interest is kind of like, oh, well, now this capability has been unlocked. How can we really like explore how we can fund public goods? And so if I don't go too far back into the past, but one can imagine there was just patronage was public goods. Like, you know, I built the Louvre and I filled it with art and everyone can come see it. But in modern era, it's like the government can do public goods. That's who builds your roads. Mm-hmm. Government is highly inefficient. So it's like an inefficient way to collect money and distribute it to public goods.
Right.
And there are nonprofits. And I feel like nonprofits are tough because you're like kind of asking people for money. It's just the whole donation model. And some do a good job and can raise the amount of funds required to do some public good.
Right.
But there's still no like real incentive alignment there or any sort of recurring revenue or fundraising in that kind of nonprofit model. And so then like enter Nouns DAO, where I just think it's a really good mechanic to fund public goods. And public goods are like super important. And I think like public goods is also a very big term, and it like literally includes the roads that are paved to your driveway or whatever. But I'm like very interested in internet public goods, and so certainly grew up in the era of open source software, and a lot of those developers had trouble monetizing their public open source work, right? They wind up doing consulting or essentially getting patronage by working for some big company that lets them work on their open source project. But now it's like, now we have this internet native money. We have people who want to like contribute to public goods. There are like business models back into the treasury. Nouns has been really effective at, first of all, funding art, then minting the art in collaboration with the artists and splitting the money. So some of that comes back into the treasury. And so I just think if we're going to talk about like venture and public goods, my real interest here is because there are just new ways to raise money for public funding and internet infrastructure and open source projects that need to be explored.
The interesting thing for me about public goods is that before I got involved with crypto or the Ethereum ecosystem, I had no idea that this was such a big thing here. Like, I feel like a lot of outsider perspectives on crypto have no idea that this is a big concern for a lot of people in the Ethereum community. Like, this idea of funding tools and platforms and infrastructure that everyone can use and benefit, much like you're alluding to, we're building this kind of new internet or the whatever we want to call it. This is something that I love about Ethereum, and I feel is really a wholesome part of what crypto is for people who are actually serious about building here. And it's something that I wish was more widely understood, particularly in the public, because I do feel like there's an increasing hostility towards a lot of tech industries, including crypto. And I feel like this public goods angle, I mean, first of all, it's important things that we need to build, and like we should fund them for that reason alone. But I also think selfishly, it's a kind of a good way to promote something like Ethereum, to talk about how we're going to build a protocol like Farcaster that could be an alternative to Twitter that everyone could use in a way that is not constrained by a centralized authority like a corporation. And I don't know, I just feel like there's a ton of potential for public goods to be a way to explain why crypto might actually be useful and important to everyday people, particularly for those who may be less familiar with how the internet itself actually got started, and like that email is a protocol. RSS is like a protocol. Like, these are like open standards that we can use. And that's why we have the cool thing that you like using. And that's why you can do this or that. So I don't know. That's a bit of a ramble, but.
No, and I would just add that So there's this abstract like animosity towards big tech, which I don't subscribe to and I think is misguided. But then there is like oh yeah, they just put ads in front of my face or they changed the algorithm. Like a good one is in my art community, every time Instagram does something to the algorithm, it annoys people, right? It's like they have figured out what the algorithm is. They have a posting mechanic. They're selling real life art. They're starving artists who can sell art because of Instagram. It's like, it's a beautiful thing. And then Instagram changes the algorithm and they all want to flee, but there's nowhere to go. And so there are like concrete examples that we can tell people of like why we need these open protocols, these public goods, this infrastructure that's not owned by anyone. I think public goods is like, I don't know if it's good branding. Like it feels very like new wave hippie granola-ish, even when I say public goods, But there's something about like what we're doing is totally a message that needs to be spread.
Totally. You've mentioned like a few times like your art practice. I noticed that you have like this recent NFT called The Stream on Zora. And so could you share a little bit about what your relationship to art is? I feel like it's not often that we get to stumble across someone that has both hands in like the builder developer world and the like artist world. So I'd love to know like what your background and relationship to art is.
Yeah, so I just started painting maybe 20 years ago, and for a very long time was a physical artist, acrylic on canvas, and sold a lot of paintings and showed a few galleries, and then have a little art studio in New York for a while that I would bring people in and sell art off the walls. And art is just part of who I am. And so, I think of this all like, if you zoom out, it's like I'm just like a maker. We all create every day. Everything we do, we're like creating. And so, I just used to love to paint. And I like to make software. And even though that can be kind of like necessary to meet a ton of people like that, although in crypto you meet more than in other places, to me it's like gives me the same feeling of like creating and making something. And also around that same time when the world was closed down, I actually had that art studio. I used to go every day alone in my art studio. No one was allowed to come visit me. And then I just started gravitating towards digital. Really, in the shortest term there, just to like show my art to people. Like I make art for myself, but it's like I want other people to see it and share it.
Right.
I love having collectors. Like, I want people to appreciate it. And then so, digital art, I like had an iPad with a pencil and I started doing digital art, and then I started sharing that. And then it's like a lot of the things about NFTs were all clicking all at the same time for me, including this like highly shareable piece of art. And I really loved that. And so that sort of got me into like this NFT practice. And I was thinking of NFTs like literally until a week or two ago. I had always thought that the power was that you have this immutable object and this immutable smart contract, and I mint an NFT to it, and it's going to live forever in that form. And if you use some kind of decentralized file store, this thing could last forever and it will never change. And then it just occurred to me that actually a lot of these smart contracts are upgradable. And the Zora contracts are like completely upgradable, which is like a great innovation in smart contracts in general. So I started thinking like, I can mint an NFT and then just change the metadata or, change the image as many times as I want. I just pay the gas fees for it. And so now all of a sudden my mindset switched from like, it's this single unique snowflake that you can own to, we have a relationship. You can buy my NFT and now I can push my art to you or, share different experiences with you without making you buy a new one every single time. And also, I want to share a lot more art than I mint because there's like a bar for me that artwork has to cross before I'm going to like ask people to pay me for it. But now that I have like the stream, and so the stream, it's just an NFT minted on Zora. It's an open edition. If you followed me on Farcaster, it's a free mint. For everyone else, it's 0.01, so a kind of a nominal amount. And what I do is I just update it. I update the artwork every few days.
Okay.
And that was kind of my notion was like, I clearly know it's not my last NFT, but I kind of, in the back of my head, think of it as like, this is the final NFT. We now have a media channel between us, and I can just update it over and over again. And so that's kind of both my path through art and then my current project, the stream.
Very cool. Before we wrap up, I'm wondering if you can tell us about some recent proposals, either in Purple or the Farcaster community, more broadly, like some things that you're excited that people are building, what's going on in the Farcaster ecosystem that you're excited about, and maybe what's coming next for Purple.
Sure. Just to talk about the recent past, we have a proposal to co-sponsor a party at ETH Denver for Farcasters, and about 400 people showed up to that party.
Wow.
And it was really amazing to meet all the people that mostly I just knew from online. It really felt like a moment in time for everyone. Our co-sponsors were Orange DAO, so thank you to them as well. Yeah, it was just a lot of momentum. Really kind of was built in person, meeting all of the people, seeing the faces, understanding people better. And so what's up for proposal right now is a party at NFT NYC. And so I expect that to pass. And again, it's a little bit of funding to co-sponsor an event that someone in the Farcaster community really did all the work to pull it all together. But the bigger picture thing here, and it's interesting to like tie Farcaster and Purple together here, is that Purple started out really beat my expectations. And so we're like building this treasury. And actually one thing that's hard about DAOs is deploying your treasury. It's like one of the learnings. It's like actually very hard to deploy your treasury, even when you want to, because one, you have to source high quality ideas. You don't want to waste money. And you have a group full of people with different opinions. And so it's very hard to like deploy your capital. And so the first thing we did was retroactively funded all of the cool stuff that happened before Purple even existed, which was very easy for us to do. It was like we all joined Purple and started Purple because there was so much good developer activity. So like, let's retroactively fund those people. But then we have a real challenge forwardly funding. Like, because it's a protocol in development, we were always like a few weeks away from the next milestone. And if we just held our funds for 1 month, next week the funds will have more impact. And as much as I tried to reject that thinking, it was like the developers in the community would tell me, just wait, I'm not going to apply for a proposal yet because in a month, XYZ will happen.
Right.
What's happening now in the next couple of weeks, and why Purple, the ETH has started to flow through Purple, is the first kind of core piece of decentralization of Farcaster, which they call hubs, is about to launch. It's in private beta now, and so there's a group of hubs, but pretty soon anyone can run a hub. And running a hub, it's like Farcaster is really like a federated network, and so if you run a hub, you have all of the data of the Farcaster network on your hub, and then you can make it accessible to other people. You can access it yourself. A lot of developers were like waiting to build a client for when they could access their own hub. And so hubs was really something we were waiting on that is weeks away, if even that. And then the second part of that is sign in with Farcaster. And so your Farcaster account is a private key. And so if you did want to go to like a third-party app, you would have to paste your seed phrase into that app, and then you get access to your Farcaster account. Which one, besides for it just being incredibly unnerving to do that, it's like, this is really like advanced mode. Fewer developers were interested in building apps that required you to give them your seed phrase. I mean, also because of the responsibility of that as well,
Totally.
And so that is launching also within the next week or two here, maybe even by the time this podcast comes out. And so now you can build apps that like, have a sign in with Farcaster button that, works like every other one of those buttons you've seen on the internet. And so the two of these together, which is hubs, which is now like the full decentralization of the Farcaster network, and sign in with Farcaster, which now makes it super easy for any app to be built, let you log in, let you post on your behalf, just means there's a lot of ideas happening now what developers want to build. And so that is starting to come through the Purple ecosystem as potential funders of these ideas. And it's everything from like a command line version of Farcaster. Someone's working on that. It's like you open up your terminal and you can cast or read casts, to data analytics. You can like pull down the whole network, pull it down to your local machine, and then use Python to manipulate it, and then to feed that into ChatGPT. And then, the things you can do with ChatGPT, maybe ask for analytics, maybe say like, show me my 5 funniest casts. So that stuff's kind of interesting.
There's a Juicebox DAO member named Philip who would absolutely love that. He's a big fan of command line interface. Yeah, he would be all over that. Anytime, it's very funny. Anytime Philip does a screen share, he makes sure to use the terminal as often as possible and in the most impressive way possible, like to just blurt out these really obscure commands, just like it's nothing, just to flex. Anyway, he would love that. Yeah, it's a thing.
I will say that my interest in this command line version of Farcaster is that it be open source, and then it just be a very simple way to like a reference app where you can pretty easily read the code because there's not a lot of UI or a lot going on, right? So it's like, how do I send a cast? And you can like find that in a command line version of the code,
right? And
get the bare bones of it. Because again, a lot of Purple's focus is on public goods, and one interpretation of that is open source software. And so we try to push for open source software whenever we can. I think it also, in the context of being a Farcaster ecosystem DAO, includes documentation, education, and then just infrastructure. Like another tool that is live now and looking to expand is called Tipcaster. And so since Farcaster is connected to your wallets, you can like very easily send money to people. So you can like sort of just tip through the network.
Okay.
Which is pretty cool. I'll just tell you that as an artist, the tool I use all the time is called FarDrop. And it's fardrop.xyz. And I pop in my Farcaster username, and it spits out an allow list of everyone who follows me. And then I always use that every time I mint now on Zora. I pop in my latest allow list, and anyone who follows me on Farcaster can mint for free or whatever I do. Usually it's mint for free. And it's also just a really great example of like the composability of this network. Like we are talking about blockchain and Ethereum, and like lots of experiences can be built on top of it that are not even possible to build on top of Twitter. Like you just can't create an allow list on Twitter. You like just don't really have any relationship with your followers besides the follow button. So those are kind of the things that are exciting me.
Yeah, really looking forward to like digging into all of the different things that come up as Farcaster and Purple build out more in the ecosystem.
The one final thing I'll add is that now venture capital has entered the chat, and there are people building Farcaster apps, clients, but other apps that are now venture backed. You know, for the greater part of the last year, it's just been kind of the hacker community, and you know, we're happy to support where we can at Purple with kind of the public goods and the open source stuff. But now there's like venture capitalists who are making this bet on Farcaster and making this bet on these teams, and I think the apps are about to rapidly get really, really good.
Interesting. Okay. Well, we'll keep our eyes peeled. Just wanted to say thanks so much, Chris, for taking the time to sit down with us and go through like all things Nounish DAOs, your trajectory and with Purple. And so just want to say thanks again. It's been really great getting to know you better.
Awesome. Thanks. I appreciate you guys having me on. I just wanted to let anyone know that you can reach me kind of on all of the platforms at C Carella, so CCarella, and particularly reach out to me if you're thinking about doing a Nounish DAO and you just want some feedback or advice or a gut check. I really love talking to people who are trying to launch their own DAOs.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Chris. This was fun. And yeah, I guess we'll see you on Farcaster.
All right. I'll see you guys there.
All right. Thanks again.
Thanks for tuning in to today's episode of the Juicebox podcast. You can find us online at juicebox.money and on Twitter at juiceboxeth. Join the conversation at discord.gg/juicebox.
The Juicebox podcast is for educational, informational, and entertainment purposes only. Views expressed by guests and the hosts do not reflect the views of Juicebox DAO or the Juicebox podcast. The Juicebox podcast is not investment advice or a solicitation to make any financial decisions. Projects on the Juicebox protocol are not vetted by Juicebox DAO.
Each project on the Juicebox protocol is responsible for its own crowdfunding parameters. The tokenomics of one project may differ from other projects on the protocol. Do not purchase JBX tokens, other cryptocurrencies, or make contributions to projects in anticipation of financial returns. Please do your own research.